The comments, opinions, and views shared during this program are of those individual Freemasons and do not reflect the official position of a Grand Lodge, Concordant Body, Appendant Body, Masonic Authority, or CraftsmanOnline.com.
Welcome back to the Craftsman Online Podcast, the only Masonic podcast endorsed by the Grand Lodge of New York. I'm your host, Right Worshipful Brother Michael Arce, and you're probably wondering, hey, a Craftsman Online Podcast episode on Wednesday. Did Arce have a little too much eggnog? No. This is a special occasion as we mark the debut of a new affiliate, a Mason's Work podcast, hosted by Brother Brian Mattocks. Welcome to the Craftsman Online Podcast.
Hey, how are you, Brother Arce?
And this is the byproduct of a couple beautiful conversations that Brian and I had. And at the end of this episode, you're going to get a little dose of his podcast, A Mason's Work, so that you can follow, and subscribe it as well, however you choose to get your podcast. But let's start here, Brian. Give us the 30,000-foot level review or overview. What is A Mason's Work, and how did you come up with it?
Well, hopefully you all know what a Mason's Work is because you were raised in the craft. And I know it's kind of a pun. The idea is when I became a Mason, I was looking for the roadmap for that whole promised good men better thing. And when I didn't see the sort of hard roadmap for okay, go here and then do this and then do that, I saw this I was raised into the vacuum of that sort of Master Mason experience where you don't really know what to do next. And then there's a bunch of petitions for appendant bodies, right in your face. So I said, well, I'm not going to go be able to give those appendant bodies the time and attention they need because I'm still on quest number one, which is good men better. So maybe I should start helping myself in that process. And so I started making sort of headway personally on my journey to become a better person. And then using the craft to do so, I worked through a lot of the relationship stuff that comes with getting over your stuff, as it were. And then I brought that back to my lodge, and they were surprisingly receptive. And I took that and as a sign that I should keep going. And then I started a podcast about a year and a half ago, where I only focus on using the symbolism of the craft to unpack yourself and become better.
Now, I got turned on to your podcast by another Pennsylvania brother, and I was like, oh, this is cool. Episodes are no more than 10 minutes. It's completely different than the style of podcast that you would hear here on the Craftsman Online Podcast, where your format, not conversational, is more you. And what I like to describe is it's like that personal mix between a personal therapy session and a personal life coach success session, where for me as a runner, I put this on and I listen to it in 7 minutes and I'm like, okay, this is a great way to start my day of really kind of taking the working tools and the things that I like about Freemasonry and finding ways to practically apply them. Not that that's to limit what your podcast is about, because you also ask fantastic questions and you get into your own topics and discussions, and it's very thought-provoking. And I feel the best way to describe your podcast to a brother or just someone who has an interest in Freemasonry who's never listened to it before is think of the Daily Stoic, and if there is a kind of a version of that for Freemasonry, this would be it. But for Masons, especially Master Masons, if you had a good experience with your Masonic education coach or your lodge education mentor or success coach or whatever it's called, when you were going through your catechism ritual study, right? If you really enjoyed that and now you kind of miss it because you need to seek it on your own, you're going to dig a Mason's Work.
Well, thank you. That's kind of the intent, right? Was we're not here to do this work alone. I have opinions just like everybody else. One of those is that true fraternity emerges from the growth that you go through in self-development and things like that with other people. That companionship is important, but it's something you can get in a lot of different places. When you work with brothers and you have time and you learn their burdens and you help them negotiate kind of what they're going through, you really get a much, much richer Masonic experience. You get this sort of, if you were playing video games, it's like an experience multiplier, right? When I can help somebody else kind of go through their stuff, I get to learn from their mistakes, which is really great. And you kind of have to believe that fundamentally if you believe in any of our rituals. It was designed to tell you a story so you learn from a brother's mistakes. This is exactly what we do. And so on the show, I try and surface as many of the mistakes I've made or the discoveries I've come across that kind of, you can't fit that back in the bottle, as it were. You can't go back developmentally. Once you know a thing, it's kind of hard to regress. And I'm just sharing the experiences and learning that I get in my everyday sort of Masonic journey.
One of the things we talked about in one of our many phone calls and text message chats is a definition and a word that you like to use. And I'm like, oh my gosh, do I run the risk of being someone who is into the meta? What is the meta when it comes to Freemasonry? And how can Masons avoid getting stuck in the meta?
The meta conversation about the craft, when you're talking about Freemasonry, you're not doing it, for lack of a better way to say it, right? If you are talking about the history of the craft and things like that, and you can't functionally apply that to how you're going to achieve your Masonic goals and objectives, you're doing the meta work. It's mistaken for action, right? It is, so I call it productively unproductive. In my case, for example, right, when I'm actively avoiding doing a thing, and this happens a lot because I'm a work in development, I have a client project due or something that I'm working on. I will go and do something that seems productive, like the laundry, as a surrogate for actively doing the thing that I was supposed to do. We do a lot of that in the craft. We talk about Freemasonry as a surrogate for the work of the craft, which is, again, the growth and self-development, the community engagement, the being a good brother, because we don't talk much about that either. What does it mean to really care for a guy? Like, how do you do that without trying to do their work for them, right? How do you parent? How do you lead? How do you do all of that stuff? How does that best expressed in a group of men trying to make sense of it?
Once I understood your definition and the way you use that word, I'm like, Brian and I are on the same page for a lot of things here. And that's what, again, makes this so exciting is that we're coming together. You're joining the Craftsman Online Podcast Network. We're excited to have you on here. With the Mason's work, you're going to get your first sample as a listener of this podcast immediately following this episode, along with all the links in the notes for this episode on how to like, follow, subscribe, do all those things so that this podcast can end up in your player, on your phone, however you get your podcast, every couple of days. Because your release schedule is what, like every 2 or 3 days, I think?
So I do 3 episodes a week. The kind of built-in guarantee is that none of the episodes are longer than, 10 minutes. Enough time to walk the dog, but not, have the dog pass out because of the walk. The idea is a lot of the craft is so dense and so rich and so wonderful. I tell people it's like, I'm old enough to remember the commercials on television when you couldn't skip them or any of that kind of stuff. And there was a commercial for a tomato sauce called Prego. And the tagline for Prego was, "It's in there."
Right.
There is so much stuff in the craft about how to live, how to grow, how to care for each other. What does it look like? It's all in there. And all I'm doing is discovering it and sharing it.
That's kind of the point I was making earlier about your shows and why I got hooked, because I immediately started listening to your back catalog. I started with episode 1 and was just like, 7 minutes, bang, 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 bang. Just let Apple Podcasts do its thing. When we're going through that guided education process, and I know it varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but for the most part, there's those 3-degree structure and you're kind of building to show the proficiency to move to the eventual being raised to Master Mason. And when you have that, process that's in place, it's very easy to get guided education. But once you become a Master Mason and it's like, hey, boom, now you know all the secrets of Masonry and here's all the working tools and go at it. If you don't have that foundation of other guys around you in your lodge, and let's be honest, a lot of us don't anymore because of some of the things that you and I both agree on, that unfortunately Freemasonry has in some instances become more of a social club. Or we look at ritual as a dirty R word and nobody wants to do it because we believe that To be proficient in ritual means that you have to know the difference between an or an and a the or a the, and not really the actual understanding of the work, right? That's where your podcast comes in and kind of fills that crack in the cement. And for guys that feel stuck because they came into this fraternity, like we both did, and were told, you're going to get these tools to become a better man. And you find out that it's about personal development. And now there isn't this Grand Lodge subscribed course that you can get on that shows you how to do this. This is why we are losing guys within 5-6 years, because they're not getting that initial thing that they were told was going to help make them better. Although some would say they are, but you have to be able to seek it on your own. And for those of us that don't have the time or can't make those connections, that's where podcasts like A Mason's Work steps in to help out.
It's important to recognize and understand that the structural elements of the craft, the administrative elements of Freemasonry, are what most men experience as the craft. You are kind of what's left in an organization. A lot of the intellectual sort of backbone of the craft, I would say, has left, but is basically just has not stuck around for the various reasons that has happened. When we start meaningfully talking to each other and using the symbols of the craft, we can rebuild the experience, that connective tissue that animates the rest of the administrative experience, right? So there is room for all of these things. It's not either or. I know a lot of guys right now in an age where the social media has kind of kicked in, and meeting remotely has kicked in, that a lot of folks are still looking for that warm, meaningful connection where they can just have a place where they can say, hey, listen, I'm just going through it right now. I don't need you to fix it. But if you've got any pointers, so I know where to look, that'd be awesome.
People that visit your website will see some of the items that you've created that can take you from feeling stuck into and being very passive in how you practice Freemasonry into making it a very active and meaningful part of your day, and that true guide and personal development to becoming a better version of yourself. That discussion is still to come. Let's talk about the episode that we've got queued up to introduce A Mason's Work to Craftsman Online podcast listeners.
The episode that I'm about to work on for you guys, I'm very excited, is something that I've talked about a little bit on the show before. One of the things that happens when you learn something new is you tend to have to learn it over and over again. You'll learn it once, like maybe I should only say positive things to somebody who's struggling, right? Or something like that. Or maybe I shouldn't try and stick my nose in something that, I don't belong involved in or whatever. But you'll learn that half a dozen different times, half a dozen different ways. That recursive nature of learning is something that I'm going to talk to a little bit more, even in the areas where you thought, oh man, I already knocked the edge off of that stone. I think I'm square there. There might be more opportunity to keep learning that lesson over and over again and look for it. So today in our episode of Mason's Work, we're going to talk about that recursion.
Welcome to A Mason's Work, the podcast where we review Masonic symbols and illustrate how they can be used to solve problems in everyday life. With your host, Brian Mattocks, a proud member of the Craftsman Online Media Network.
Hi, and thanks for listening to this special episode of A Mason's Work for the Craftsman Online listeners. I wanted today to talk a little bit more about what Brother Narcy and I kind of alluded to in the episode, and that is the recursive nature of the way we learn things. It is very likely that you can look back in your own sort of mental landscape and remember situations where you learned something multiple times, the same thing multiple times. You may have learned easy kind of high-level concepts like maybe I shouldn't be greedy, or you may have learned concepts like maybe I have to take action here when I really, really don't want to, and you found your courage. And when you find your courage to learn and grow, that's going to change shape and dimension over time. Good examples of this are essentially as you grow and develop, you are capable of more complex problems you're capable of solving or addressing. larger and broader issues than you were perhaps when you were a child, let's hope. And so as that happens, your scope increases, but our radar for the kind of issues that we've already solved doesn't necessarily expand at the same rate as our capacities do. So what do I mean by that? I mean to say that when you look at the lessons that you've learned over the course of your life, the way you came to those lessons more often than not was through a condition that you were suffering from. But the nature of that suffering changes again as you grow, and you may not recognize the issues that recur later on in your life as matching ones you've already solved once when you were younger. And when this happens, you essentially have to learn the same lesson again in a slightly different context. As you do this, you tend to find that you have to learn that lesson, whatever that lesson might be, probably once when you were a child or very young, once or twice as a teenager. Yes, you can learn as a teenager. I'm sure all of you that have made it through it successfully learned quite a bit. You also will learn that same lesson probably in your young adulthood, then middle age, then your senior age, and then your twilight years, et cetera, et cetera. Those kind of inflection points help you essentially in that because the context of your experience changes so significantly at each of those kind of major phases of your life, you have to update your roadmap for the things that you're suffering from to match, so you can essentially not have to go through all of the suffering all over again that you've gone through to get from sort of point A to point B, if you will. So how does this work for us as Masons? Is there a way to shortcut that process? Or are there tools that we can use to essentially help us do that context switching more quickly so we can kind of get to those places faster and say, oh, yes, I've already learned this once, or oh, yes, I know what this looks like. And the short answer is the aprons in the lodge will help you. And so the aprons in the lodge, the Enter Apprentice, the Fellowcraft, the Master Mason, and all of the aprons of all of the officers are effectively roles that you can take on. If you imagine a lodge room, for example, and you'll have everyone in that lodge room sitting in a different position. They all have a different view of the truth in the center of the room. They all have a different perspective. Each one of those aprons represents a perspective that you can take to help you look at a situation. That same structured approach of sort of putting on each apron conceptually in your mind as you address a situation you're struggling with or you face in your life, that process of walking through those aprons effectively should help you identify recurring contexts over and over again, because each of those aprons represents a way of thinking, and a way of thinking that, if used well, can help you identify these recurring patterns. So if you listened to our episode today and you like what you've heard, you'll find on the sort of main feed for A Mason's Work a lot of these perspectives from these different positions in the lodge. You'll find a lot of perspectives that use the tools as well to help you essentially get to this faster level of recursive learning and grow and evolve as a person, thereby better fitting you as living stones, etc., etc. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope to find you on our regular listener list. If you want to find more about our work at A Mason's Work, just visit our website or podcast@amasonswork.com. And thanks again.
The views represented in this podcast are those of the speaker alone and are not representative of any grand or subordinate lodge.
Hi, Brian here. I wanted to thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you have any suggestions or guidance for further episodes you'd like to see or hear, whatever the case may be, please don't hesitate to reach out to me at amasonswork.com, and we will try and incorporate your suggestions into a future recording. Thanks.